Welcome to Casting Scenics. This week I'm going to be making modular river terrain. Stay tuned. I've got some strips of 1/4 inch thick XPF foam that I'm going to use to turn into these ends for my river sections. Using a template that I've made out of cardstock with a couple of stick pins. Cutting out the shape on my hot wire cutter here. And I've got my exhaust fan on to suck out those fumes. It's pretty important that you make all of these end pieces the same, which is why I've gone to the trouble to make these cardboard templates. Just hot gluing these pieces on to some 6 by 6 inch by 1/4 inch thick XPF foam strips. This is more like 6 by 10, possibly. I'm using this particular piece as a 90-degree angle. And I'm starting to draw out the outline of my river sections. You can certainly make as many pieces as you'd like, but I've gone with 5. I'm going to cast them so I'll be able to make duplicates, and with these 5 pieces I'll be able to make as many combinations as I like. Here I'm using the table to cut out the silhouette, making sure everything's organic. I figured these 5 pieces would give me enough variation. You can certainly make as many or as few as you'd like, but this is what I've chosen to go with. This foam is thin enough that you could very easily use a hobby knife to cut out this outline. The hot wire table is just a little more convenient, especially when it comes to the end pieces that will butt up against each other to make the river joints. This is my river termination piece. I could have gone with a pond or a lake, but I decided to go with this instead. I can always make another piece later. As you can see, these pieces are pretty interchangeable. Whichever combination you need at that particular time, you can go with. I'm using Sculpting to finish out the surface of the river with a little bit of black paint, just so I end up with a gray piece as opposed to a bright white. I found that doesn't really work well with the camera. This way you'll be able to see some of the detail, not that this is an extremely detailed piece. And I'm just slapping the Sculpting on with my hands. I'm not trying to do anything particularly detailed here, just making a bank. After I've cast these pieces, I'm going to go back with epoxy resin as a water effect and I need these banks to capture that water, or resin rather. At this point I'm just putting the sculpting mold down with my hands, just kind of going for a rough texture here. A tongue depressor would work at this point, but not nearly as well, at least not for me. Just going for some naturalistic curves here, random depressions and small outcroppings. Now I've started tapping everything down with a 1-inch chip brush. It's going to help simulate dirt texture. Although I'm going to come back in with glue and dirt later. This will serve as a nice base. I'll let the sculpting mold start to set up some before going with this step. Getting rid of some of those finger marks I put in there earlier. I'm stippling here rather than brushing. I think this will give me a more naturalistic finish. Now that that's had some time to dry, I'm going over the surface with some 120 grit sandpaper. Just knocking down some of those particularly sharp points. I'm going to end up casting this in resin, so a bunch of sharp, jagged edges aren't something I necessarily want. As you can see, everything is lining up here. These pieces interchange very nicely. And I'm going over the entire surface with some tacky glue. I've got out a bunch of various ballasts that I had intended on going with, but I decided in the end to just stick with a small dirt pattern, or texture rather. The majority of this is going to be covered in resin, and what isn't will be covered in grass flocking, so very little actual dirt's going to be seen. Just going over the entire surface with this dirt. All these pieces are going to get the same treatment. Nothing too fancy. Again, this is just a tacky glue. Straight tacky glue. It's not been diluted with water. And this is dirt that I got out of my driveway. So it's a pretty cheap process, at least so far. And this is Beatty. Just hanging out with the old man, and some scratches. A few bites in, kind of playful, kind of not knowing if she wants to straight up attack or keep it kind of chill. Living dangerously, asking for trouble. But yeah, I know when to cut and run. Okay, here I have cut some pieces that are going to act as standoffs so that when I glue my parts down to get cast in silicone, I've got a lip on the bottom there. Basically, it's going to act as a stop. And as you can see, I have texture coated everything. Now I'm just going over it all with a coat of polyacrylic sealant. The polyacrylic is going to absorb quite a bit. It's going to give me a non-porous surface so that the silicone doesn't try to absorb into the finished piece. And a full day later, the acrylic varnish has had a chance to dry. Now I've got some cardstock strips and some bases here that I've cut out. I've got everything sort of keyed. Just trace out what you want with a Sharpie. Here I'm just starting to hot glue these barricades in place. This is going to act as a dam for the silicone later. Kind of an arduous process, but it's worth it to get right. You certainly don't want a bunch of expensive silicone running out onto the floor. For now, I'm just tacking these pieces into place. I'm going to come back later with a full bead of hot glue. Make sure I don't have any leaks. The reason I'm just tacking this now is because it dries a lot quicker when it's not a solid bead of hot glue. Cutting away the excess here and making sure I've got that joint completely sealed up. Now that I've got those made, it is time to go back and seal all these joints with hot glue. I'm just running a continuous bead of hot glue around everything, inside and out, no chances. Now that all that's dry, I'm putting the pieces into place. A little hot glue. I continue the process, make sure that I've got all of them secured down to the base. Once I do, I take a little bit of mold release here. This is a pretty rough texture, so I'm just going to go over all these surfaces pretty lightly with mold release. And once I've got that done, it's time to get out the silicone. This is a 10-to-1 mix by weight, silicone to catalyst. but I got my mixer right, and I am going with a beater and a drill. If you do not have a vacuum chamber and can't degas your silicone, I would suggest against this. This incorporates quite a bit of air into the silicone, but it is a very quick way to mix it. And if you've got a vacuum chamber, incorporating air is not really a problem, because in this step, I'm going to get it all out. Turn on my vacuum pump. And as you can see, the silicone has started to boil. It's releasing air from the silicone. And there it went. Vast majority of the air is out of it, and I'm just gonna seal this off and let it do its thing for a little while. Now that most of the air has been released, I'm releasing this check valve here. Slowly releasing vacuum. And I'm good to take the lid off. Generally, you want to try to find a low spot in your mold and start there. Stay in that spot. Here, I didn't leave much room around the edge, so I'm just sticking to one corner of this mold. I want to give that silicone a chance to equalize. Kind of find its own level before I keep pouring. Okay, I've poured everything, and as you can see, it is dry. I've gone ahead and pulled one of these off camera just to make sure I don't make an ass of myself by sticking my fingers in some wet silicone on film. If you noticed earlier, I didn't go with a heavy coat of release. I wouldn't say that bit me, but it sort of bit me. Bless you, Blank. Were I trying to save these original terrain pieces, I would have been in a mess. I was not trying to save these original terrain pieces though, so things worked out. But yeah, as you can see, that silicone really grabbed the paper and the Sculpting mold and released it right from the foam there. Oh well, like I said, wasn't trying to save the original terrain piece so long as I've got some good molds, and I do. So that worked out. As you can see, I got the majority of the Sculpting mold out of the molds. In order to get the rest out, I'm going to go with a bucket of water. Let this soak for a while and come back with a scrub brush, tongue depressor, whatever it takes to get the Sculpting mold out of here. It wasn't too difficult. Now that I've gotten all those molds clean and I've thoroughly let them dry, it's time to start pouring some urethane resin. 1 part A, 1 part B, and I've added in some brown pigment. This stuff takes about 5 minutes to cure, and it's pretty durable after it's dried. Waterproof. You can paint it with spray paint with absolutely no worries of it eating the urethane resin. And this is what my modular river looks like so far. Now I've put a brown primer coat on all these pieces. In the deepest parts of the river, I am going with a very dark brown. Added some black craft paint to my brown craft paint, and I'm gonna wet blend this out to a medium brown on the outside banks of the river. Outer banks of the river? Sure, why not? Now, after all this dries, I'm going to come back with some white and make a light brown for a dry brush. Not going super heavy, just a little something to pull out some of the detail. I'm going to end up going over this with a wash, so that'll help blend everything together. That wash I spoke of, I am pushing through a airbrush. Could have brushed it on, but this is much quicker and I use a lot less wash this way, so I'll take it. Now here I've actually cast up 2 rivers. I've got packing tape on the ends to keep everything self-contained, and by everything I guess I mean the epoxy. This is a tabletop epoxy. It is a 1-to-1 ratio. I've got a few inks here that I'm using to color this to make it look like deep water. Just going with a blue here. Bluish green, I guess. These inks are pretty potent, so I'm going with 1 drop of yellow and 2 drops of blue in 1 pint of resin. And this is the color I end up with, so yeah, potent. Again, between the termination points of the river pieces, I've got packing tape in place. That's going to keep the resin from spilling out everywhere, and it's also going to keep these pieces from gluing themselves together. The reason I have all the ends butted up to one another is so that the packing tape doesn't try to bulge out with the pressure of the resin pushing outwards. And it worked out, everything released. Here's a better look at that tape. I didn't hot glue any of these edges or anything. I had a couple of places where some of the resin spilled out, but it wasn't bad at all. Honestly, it's the first time I've done this and I kind of didn't know how that was going to work out, but it did well. Going over this surface with some tacky glue. Going to put down some static grass flocking. And I've got my static grass applicator filled with 2 mil Summer and Scorched Earth blend from World War Scenics. This static grass applicator is something I've made. It's kind of a beast. It's sort of heavy. A lighter model might be kind of nice. But it's what I've got for now, so I think I'm just going to stick with it, at least in the short term. It works. Now that that's dried, I'm going to go over the surface of the water with some clear paintable caulking. It's white right now, but it will dry clear. And again, I'm adding some of these inks, pigment, this water effect I'm going with here. Again, 1 part yellow, 2 parts blue. This is going to act as my water texture. I found that just tapping this particular caulking in with an acid brush gives a nice ripple effect. Also dries very durable, and it's not at all sticky. It takes about 24 hours to completely dry. I've tried Mod Podge, and some of that stuff can take forever. Some of it dries pretty quickly, but it's not too terribly durable. For the most part, you can just peel it right off. Kind of bummed me out when I found that out. So I've moved over to clear acrylic caulking, and I like it quite a bit. And this is what it looks like after it's dried. Not too bad, I don't think. And like I said, everything's pretty much interchangeable, with the exception of the end piece. That's what it looks like on the table. And if you cast more than one like I have, you can make a river as long as you'd like. That's the video. That concludes the video. Stay tuned next time for more terrain. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Thanks.